All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing along the path of the warrior by examining the Beast of Deliverance archetype for the warrior. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All of those things are really, really important. They help Google, they help tell Google to share this with as many people as possible. So, yeah, definitely didn't do that. We've been going over the warrior, and the base version of the warrior was not great. It fell into a problem that we've seen with a couple other classes, where it basically just took some defining features from other classes, watered them down, and then tried to build a class around them that just didn't quite work. So I made some suggestions to make it a little bit different, to make it play very, very differently from anything currently on the market. And I think it's turned out pretty interesting. It is very much a more defensive-focused class. But you get to do it in a way that doesn't really exist in 5th edition. It actually used to exist in 4th edition, which I love bringing 4th edition ideas back. First of all, because it pisses off the 3E purists, and they're a really fun group to piss off, just in general. If you want to have a fun time, you don't mind death threats, they're really fun. But also, there were a lot of really awesome ideas in 4th edition, and it was a super, super fun edition to play. So yeah, anytime I can bring stuff like that back, I am totally open for that. So, quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, they have these things that we call defining features. These are things that are either unique to the class or aren't unique, but the class gets them earlier or can use them in a different way than any other class. And in order for something to be considered a defining feature, it has to show up in the first two levels. So, what are the defining features of the revised warrior? The old warrior, the defining features were Berserk, which was a watered-down version of Rage from the Barbarian, and Reckless Attack, which is Barbarian. It was almost identical to Barbarian defining features, except Berserk was significantly worse. The revised one, we got rid of Reckless Attack, and the only real defining feature is called Defiance, which is a stance that you activate as a bonus action, and then anytime you hit an enemy with a melee weapon attack, you can you can mark them. And what the mark does is anytime they try to attack a creature other than you, they have disadvantage on the attack roll. And anytime they try to cast a spell that requires a saving throw that doesn't include you in the area of effect, or as one of the people that has to make the saving throw, everyone making the saving throw has advantage on the save. So, it really, really kind of changes how you want to play the class. Really based around the idea, do you want to use the marking ability to just convince enemies to attack you because you have a d12 hit die, so you can take a lot of damage, and you can wear both shields and heavy armor, so you can have really, really high AC, meaning they'll miss a lot more. So do you want to use the mark to kind of make them focus on you, or do you want to use the mark to effectively mark someone, get the heck away from them, and then force them to either lose their attack action completely, or make an attack against a target with disadvantage, meaning it's much less likely that the target will hit. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like I said, in 4th edition, it was part of the core rules was the marking mechanic. and I think it turns it into a pretty interesting class. So the last subclass we looked at was the Beast of Defiance, and that was supposed to focus on kind of defense from the base thing. So we kind of modified it to be more of a mitigation style thing, where it was really built around the idea of I'm going to take damage and lessen the damage as much as I can to protect my party. The Beast of Deliverance, on the other hand, is basically meant to be the damage dealing subclass. Which, if you look at the warrior in Final Fantasy XIV, the warrior is not a damage dealing class. In fact, as far as tanks are ranked, it is currently the third highest DPS, which is damage per second, the third highest damage dealing class of the tanks, and there's only 4. So there's only one tank that does less damage than the warrior. So a damage dealing warrior is not something that really is rooted a ton in Final Fantasy XIV. However, a lot of the abilities that they get here, that when they translate into 5th edition would kind of be considered damage dealing abilities, are actually taken pretty closely from some of the abilities that you have in Final Fantasy XIV. Things like warriors have the ability to get increased critical hit chance. Warriors have this thing called Fell Cleave, which eventually turns into, I can't remember what it's called, Inner Release or something like that. No, Inner Beast, something. It has inner in it. But basically what it does is it does this super powerful attack, and it auto crits when you get to level 80. It is an automatic critical hit. So the warrior does kind of lean around critical hit being the way that it does a lot of its damage. And damage does translate into threats, which is the big thing that tanks want to focus on in general, is that they're producing a ton of threats so that their allies aren't getting hit. That and making sure the boss is faced away from the party so the tank busters don't kill your healer. I've had that happen a couple times with new tanks where they didn't realize they had to turn the boss. And therefore a tank buster came, and the white mage there. The thing with tank busters is a lot of them are area of effects or cleaves, but they don't put a marker on the ground, so nobody else is aware that they're going to get killed by this, and they do tons and tons of damage, which for a tank isn't that big a deal because they have all this mitigation stuff and they have tons of hit points. But for, a white mage, it's a one hit KO. Like, there's nothing they can do to survive it to the tank buster. So anyway, let's dive into the Beast of Deliverance. Like before, I'm going to go through it, basing it on how it's written here, and talk about how it should work if you're playing it as written. And then during final thoughts, I'm going to give my suggestions on what to change it to so that it just works better with the revised version of the warrior, and just make it work better in general. So the first thing you get at 3rd level is called Inner Release. While you are under the effect of Berserk, your weapon attacks score a critical hit on a roll of 19 or 20. At 14th level, your weapon attacks score a critical hit on a roll of 18 to 20. If that's sounding familiar, that's because it is almost identical to the Champion Fighter 3rd level ability, which is they get expanded crit range. That is the kind of defining aspect of the Champion Fighter, and it is, to my knowledge, again, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about this, to my knowledge, I believe it is the only crit expanding ability of any subclass in 5th edition D&D. They specifically made it exclusive to the Champion Fighter to make that a reason why you would want to play the Champion Fighter. For those of you who don't know what the Champion Fighter is, the Champion Fighter is the subclass that comes with the system's reference document, which is basically the open source version of 5th edition. It is considered the default fighter, and it's one of the least complicated fighters to play. Like, all of the abilities built into the champion fighter are built around the idea of, okay, just go out and attack things, and everything else built around this will just make it work better for you. So it's actually a really great class for people that are new to D&D, because it means that they don't have to worry about action economy, and it means that they don't have to worry about, you know, picking the right spell or using the right ability in the right situation. For the most part, you're going to be able to just go in, find a target that you don't like, and then hit it until it dies, and you're going to have a good time playing the class. Now, does that mean that that it's a super boring class and anything? No. Especially if you start using feats and things like that, it can get very complicated and very interesting. But that's what it is. So inner release, again, follows the same pattern that we keep seeing of you take a feature from another class or subclass and then you water it down. In this particular instance, they water it down by tying it to Berserk. Now, that does make sense from the idea of your subclass should interact with your defining features. They should either improve them in some way or change them in some way so you can play differently. But your defining features in general should show up in your subclass. And if they don't, there should be a really, really good reason why, as in the subclass kind of modifies how the class itself works or something. Which, from all the times that I've seen subclasses that try to drastically change how a class works, I have seen it work, I think, 2 or 3 times. Most of the time, if you're trying to massively change how a class works, just build a new class. Or play a different class. If you're trying to make like a fighter act more like a monk, just play a monk. If that's what you're looking for, because doing a subclass to try and turn them into a pseudo-monk generally doesn't work, because the two classes are so diametrically different that it's never going to work. So, so with inner release, I mean, it's not bad, but it's also not good. There's really nothing in the base class that really helps you with being able to crit more often. Again, an expanded crit range for something like a barbarian is a really big deal, because they get to roll additional damage dice when they crit. And one of the really, really common combinations of races and classes is a half-orc barbarian, because half-orcs get to roll an additional damage die whenever they crit, and barbarians get to roll an additional damage die whenever they crit starting at 9th level, and then they get more and more damage dice, additional dice, as they level up. They turn into these really, really deadly crit machines, and by using reckless attack, they just go nuts, especially if you go the berserker path, where you also get to make a third attack as a bonus action when you are raging. None of that exists for the warrior. Yes, they have reckless attack, so technically it's slightly easier for them to get the crits. But beyond that, like, again, the reason this works so well for the champion fighter is fighters are built around the idea that they get more attacks than any other class. One of their defining features is Action Surge. Action Surge gives them another round of attacks. And starting at 11th level, they have 3 attacks per turn. Then they can Action Surge, get another 3 attacks. If they're dual wielding, that can give them a 4th attack. So by 11th level, they can make 7 attacks in a turn. And by 20th level, they can make 9 attacks in a turn. And with being able to crit all the way down to an 18, that means a lot of their attacks are going to crit. With this, the most attacks you could ever do with a warrior is 3. And that's only if you are to dual wielding. And dual wielding in general also means you're going to be doing less damage, because the damage dice are smaller. If you want to play the kind of Final Fantasy XIV version of a warrior where they use a massive great axe, you can't dual wield. So you only ever get 2 attacks per turn. Even with the reckless attack in the base class, you're not really going to get that much of a benefit, because there's not a whole lot else in the class that actually gives you any sort of benefit to hitting. Like, again, the base class is built a little bit more around damage mitigation and tanking, because that's what the class is built around in Final Fantasy 14. So while it's not a quote-unquote bad ability, other than the fact that, again, it's a watered-down ability from a different class, the reason it works with the champion fighter is fighters are built around the idea that they get lots of attacks. The warrior isn't. And so giving them the expanded crit is nowhere near as useful to them than anything else. So yeah. Going to 6th level, you get Storm's Eye. When you successfully land a melee weapon attack while under the effect of Berserk, you may declare you're using Storm's Eye. The target creature makes a Constitution saving throw against your Berserk DC, which is strength-based. On a failed save, the creature receives 1d6 bonus damage from weapon attacks against it for a number of rounds equal to your strength ability modifier. The bonus damage is increased to 2d6 at 14th level. You may only use Storm's Eye once during each use of Berserk. So there's some interesting stuff in Storm's Eye that gets ruined by just not understanding the breadth of what the ability does. So first things first, when you successfully land a melee weapon attack while under the effects of Berserk. So it's tied to Berserk. Again, that makes sense. You should be doing something like that. By saying when you successfully land a melee weapon attack, it means you are never wasting Storm's Eye because, or let me rephrase that. You aren't wasting it nearly as often simply because if you have to declare it before you make an attack, if you miss that attack, you might get rid of Storm's Eye without ever having used it. And it is limited to once per Berserk, which again, I'm not a huge fan of you can only use it once per Berserk or whatever, simply because it seems like a backwards way of allowing you to use 2 Berserk ending abilities while only sacrificing 1 use of Berserk. And I like the idea of there are certain abilities that will actually use a charge of Berserk or for the revised version, Defiance. Simply because that creates, an interesting way to think about your remaining uses of Berserk or Defiance. They are not just a rage state. They are also a limited resource that you can spend on doing other things. I like that. When you have things that, it could, you can only use it once, but it doesn't end your Berserk, it kind of seems like, you're kind of pussyfooting around with that idea, and I don't think it's a very good limiting factor. If for no other reason than it prevents you from being able to use Storm's Eye, again, possibly for the rest of the fight. And it's a cool ability. Now, tying it to a Constitution save, I think is a useful way to limit its powerfulness, because this is an ungodly powerful ability, specifically for anyone that gets to make multiple attacks. Now, this one is limited to weapon attacks, but weapon attacks technically are relatively broadly defined. Like, there's a lot of different classes that do weapon attacks. Even monks, when they use their unarmed strikes, sometimes count as weapon attacks and sometimes don't, depending on which ruling you're dealing with. But if you combine this ability with a fighter, anyone dual wielding, and anyone with an expanded crit range, this turns into a monumental ability. Especially since it lasts, again, by 6th level, you probably, bare minimum at 6th level, you have a 16th strength. If you start this class without a 16th strength, you've probably had bad dice rolls for rolling your stats. Otherwise, it should be 16 bare minimum. More likely than not, you're at 18th level. So you're at 18 strength because once you hit level 4, you're going to increase your strength because strength is super, super important for this class. So that means this lasts for 4 rounds. Again, at 6th level, all classes are going to have their extra attack feature. So for a dual wielding, let's go for a dual wielding ranger. They are going to be able to do, let's say they're using scimitars, which is a very common thing for dual wielding rangers to use. Every attack they do, as long as they've hunters marked the target, they're going to do 1d6 from the scimitar, 1d6 from Storm's Eye, and 1d6 from Hunter's Mark. So they do 3d6 plus their dexterity modifier every attack, and they make 3 attacks. So just from this ability, if they make 3 attacks, that's 3d6 additional damage. Now, combine that over 4 turns, that is 12d6 damage from one character. Now, you have a fighter with you who has action surge and is dual wielding. That will be 5 attacks on their first turn, which means 5d6 additional damage. And then for the remaining turns, they will have 3d6 additional damage, turning it into a grand total of 14d6 damage for a fighter. A monk can technically get 4 attacks, and I've given up trying to figure out whether a monk's unarmed strike would count as a weapon attack for this specific ability. I play monks all the time, and even I have to look up when it counts as a weapon attack and when it doesn't. So that is one thing I'm less than thrilled about 5th edition, is just how weird the monk's unarmed strike is, because in earlier editions, unarmed strikes was a weapon and then it wasn't, but then for monks it sometimes is a weapon and then it sometimes isn't, and it's confusing. But just to make this easier, let's say a monk can use their unarmed strike as a weapon attack for this particular ability. That is 4d6 damage every turn, which at 6th level they can definitely do that every turn for 4 turns, which is 16 d6 additional damage. At 6th level, this is the most powerful ability in the game. And it is unbelievably powerful. And when you get to 14th level and it turns into 2d6, it will outclass literally every other damaging ability in the entire game, simply because it lasts so long. And that's not even dealing with the idea of critical hits. Combine Storm's Eye with Fairy Fire, especially after 14th level, and you can one-shot, in a single turn, you can bloody, if not completely kill, an ancient red dragon, which has some of the highest hit points in the game. That is how powerful this ability is. Now, if you look at it only how it interacts with inner release, this actually justifies inner release for this subclass. Because again, now the expanded criticals, because you're getting additional damage die to your attacks, that means they get doubled when you crit. So Storm's Eye works really, really well with inner release. However, it's when you combine it with literally every other weapon-based class in the entire game that it becomes a massively broken ability. And again, it doesn't end your berserks. You still get to do all the other berserk stuff while doing this. So my big issue with Storm's Eye is it is just entirely too powerful in a group setting for how long it lasts. It's an interesting ability, don't get me wrong, and it definitely does kind of transform the warrior from a defensive fighter into a little bit more offensive fighter. However, it does it in a really, really weird way. Because again, Storm's Eye is only ever going to interact with Berserk and Reckless Attack. Literally the rest of the cool stuff that you get for the entire rest of the class, other than probably Upheaval. Upheaval can't crit, so no, it doesn't do anything with Upheaval. So yeah, literally the rest of the class is ignored, and that's kind of the damaging part of this class, is how much of the rest of the class is just ignored. Like, you could literally ignore everything you get after second level with the Beast of Deliverance, because you're never going to use it. You're only going to be using Inner Release and Storm's Eye and stuff like that, because of just how powerful it is. So yeah, it needs some toning down to make it anywhere near balanced in some way. Cool. So at 10th level, you get Wild Expertise. You choose one skill from Acrobatics, Athletics, Stealth, or Survival and gain proficiency in that skill. If you are already proficient in that ability, double your proficiency bonus when you make ability checks using that skill. So, Wild Expertise is Expertise. Expertise is a thing that rogues and bards get. It's a really useful ability. It is kind of a defining feature of the rogue. But again, it's not exclusive to the rogue. And there are other subclasses, I believe, that add expertise as well. It's a useful thing. I don't really see anything wrong with Wild Expertise beyond adding stealth. Everything else about the Beast of Deliverance, like, to read the description of it so that you get a better idea of what it is. A warrior of the reckless tradition has grown alongside their inner beast. They allow this force to take over and push their bodies to incredible feats of strength. They fight without care for their own safety, allowing bloodlust to take over. A reckless warrior's inner beast is hungry, and they allow this overwhelming force to feed without a thought of reserve. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for stealth. For acrobatics, I can kind of see that. It definitely makes sense for athletics. For acrobatics, fighting without... a lot of people think acrobatics is in doing things like balancing on balancing on a branch or something like that. That is something that's done entirely with muscle tone. Effectively, is entirely done through your balance and everything, and it's not. There's actually a lot of different ways that you can learn to have a really good sense of balance. One of them, there was this show forever ago called, I think it's called Fight Science or something, and they had someone that was a quote-unquote master of ninjutsu. Funny enough, ninjutsu isn't a martial art, but we'll ignore that for right now. Ninja isn't a martial art, it's a job. It's kind of like saying, I am a master of the art of cashier. No, cashier's a job. There are a lot of skills built into being a cashier. But that's, yeah. So anyone that says that they are master ninja is a job. There are martial arts that claim that they are ninjutsu, that they were taught. Most of those are bullshit. However, the specific skill set that this person had was basically the skill set of someone that would have been a ninja. And one of the things that is very, very useful if you are going to be an assassin effectively, which is one of the things that ninjas did. The ninjas were effectively spies, and they were remarkably good at what they did. Was the ability to balance, have really, really good balance, because ninjas would go in weird places. The traditional ninja garb that everyone knows, where they have the thing and it's all black. Fun fact, that is actually the stagehand garb for, I believe it's Ibuki, the theater. In Japan, theater was a big thing. And one of the things that would happen in theater, because they would do theater in the round a little bit more, which if you're not familiar, theater in the round is where the stage is in the center and the audience is literally around everyone. Around the actors. So you have audience on all four sides. And so what would happen is when magical things needed to happen or things needed to move, you'd have your stagehands come out. And the way that the audience would know that these people don't actually exist, we're supposed to ignore them, is they would wear all black with these masks on. And so they could do things like if the play had something magical happening where, maybe, one of the people would fly through the air or something, do like what we would use wire work for now. these people would come out, they'd lift an actor up, or they would, take the dart that they were throwing, and they would have it go through the air and stuff like that. They were literally meant to pretend they were green screen, effectively, people in green screen suits, and that's how people viewed them. Well, samurai and shogun would actually participate in these theater things, and so a really easy way to get close to an important person you were trying to assassinate would be to be a stagehand, because people were already conditioned to pretend they don't exist. So if you could infiltrate as a stagehand, you could get up and literally assassinate the dude before anyone realized or would acknowledge you were there, because they would actively block out that you existed. So that's why ninjas wear that garb. They're literally stagehands. Anyway, back to the class. So when we're talking about fight science and things like that, one of the ways you can have really great balance is how this ninjutsu master had it, where he literally had such good control over his musculature that they actually had these things called lotus poles, which are kind of skinny poles with a little tiny platform at the top that you learn balance on. You're supposed to jump between them. And they had pressure sensors on them. And what they did is they actually watched exactly how this ninja shifted his weights and moved his foot. So he was literally doing this, but it was so imperceptible that you couldn't have noticed it without the pressure sensors. And that's how he was able to balance, despite the fact that his center of balance, basically the way that balance works is you have this thing called your center of balance, and then you basically have this area that, as long as the center of balance is within your base, you won't fall over. The second your center of balance travels outside of your base, you will fall. It's just basic physics. So that is one way you can have very good balance and do kind of acrobatic things. Another way is something that's extremely common in Kung Fu, which is have a really wide base. Again, center of balance, you have your base and your center of balance. And as long as the center of balance is within your base, you won't fall. If you make your base this wide, your center of balance can be anywhere inside of it. And so things like horse stance is built on the idea that if I have a really wide base, I can bend and move and do all these things, that I can take all these hits that will shift my center of balance in extreme directions, and I will never fall down or move because my center of balance is very wide. So the idea of having someone that is very reckless be able to still do very acrobatic things kind of makes sense to me. And survival, you can argue a reckless person would be able to survive very well, because maybe they would take chance on eating things or finding things or going in certain places that they normally wouldn't were they not so reckless. So all those make sense. The stealth doesn't for me. Stealth is not a reckless thing. It is something that is very much planned. It is something that requires immense amounts of training and practice. That is the one thing I would kind of kibosh from this, is get rid of stealth. It doesn't make sense. Everything else does. Stealth also doesn't really fit the playstyle of the class from a mechanical standpoint. It has no way to enter stealth in Kika combat other than using an action, which is not a good idea. They'll lose their berserk if they did do that. Just kibosh this is stealth. It doesn't make sense. The rest of it's cool. Finally, at 14th level, you get Fell Cleave. This is my assumption of the favorite ability of all warriors. Zepla, she's a Final Fantasy XIV content creator on YouTube and a streamer. Zepla did a series where on Twitter she asked people, why do you play the class that you play? And warriors almost unequivocally said Fellcleave. It's like Fellcleave go brrr. It's a really attractive ability. And at 80th level, you get an improved version of it, and it's just cool. It's a cool ability. So this is Fellcleave. While you are under the effects of Berserk, you may use Fellcleave as an action. Make an attack roll against a single creature within melee range. This attack has a critical range of 15 to 20. On a successful attack, you deal the regular damage of the attack and a bonus 5d10 damage. your Berserk ends immediately after the attack is resolved. So there are a lot of problems with Fell Cleave. First of all, it expands your critical range down to 15 to 20. It means you have a 25% chance of critting, and because the base class already has Reckless Attack, you are almost guaranteed to crit. If you combine Fell Cleave with Storm's Eye, which you really should be, that means on a single attack, you're going to do your weapon damage plus 2d6 plus 5d10, and all of that is going to be doubled. So technically, this is 10d10 damage plus 4d6 plus probably 2d12 if you're using a Great Axe. Again, probably one of the most damaging abilities in the game. Now, the one limiting factor is it does end your Berserk, but by 14th level, you have like 5 of them, I believe. Let me look here. 14th level, yeah, you have 5. By 17th, so 3 more levels, you have 6. You can do a crap ton of damage with that, especially since Berserk only takes your bonus action. So quite literally, you could Fell Cleave 5 times in a row. And with Storm's Eye, really all you would need to do is... Oh yeah, you'd only have to do Storm's Eye once. So in your first turn, you could Berserk, hit, so you could activate Sister Storm's Eye, and then every turn subsequently, you would just Fell Cleave every single time. And the majority of those attacks would be crits, and you would, again, be able to one-shot just about anything. Again, I'm a fan of expanded critical ranges for certain things. This is too much. A critical hit is meant to be kind of special. This is almost a guaranteed critical hit, which again, if you go to Final Fantasy XIV, again, at 80th level, it is a guaranteed critical hit. But a critical hit in Final Fantasy XIV is extremely different than a critical hit in D&D 5th edition. A critical hit in Final Fantasy XIV won't take off 1% of a boss's life. They're just not that powerful. Now, if you get them over and over and over again, and when your entire party is attacking the monster, it eventually goes down pretty quickly. But a single critical hit is never going to be a game changer. In D&D, this one attack, if it crits, will be a game changer. Now, it's theoretically possible that the way it was worded, they intended the 5d10 to not get doubled with the crit. But no, even I can't. Like, I don't see a way you could interpret it that way. It is, you deal the regular damage of the attack and a bonus 5d10 damage. Yeah, on a crit, you're going to do 10d10 damage for this. Again, that would make this more powerful than a 9th level spell. And again, for a class that's supposed to be built on the idea of being a tank, this doesn't make a ton of sense to give them the most powerful damaging attack in the game, and then also they're a tank that doesn't take much damage at all, and all that. Like, it's this weird dichotomy, and it definitely needs to be reined in a lot, because that's just it's so powerful. So yeah. Final thoughts. So the base version of the class, I'm not a fan with. Inner Release only makes sense when you combine it with everything else in the subclass. At 3rd level, it's a wasted ability. I get that it reinforces the rest of the class, but when you get an ability that's reinforcing things that you don't actually have yet, it's not really great. I would almost say, if you were going to play this as written, switch Inner Release and Storm's Eye, simply because then Inner Release makes more sense. That causes issues with Storm's Eye because it's too powerful for a 6th level ability, much less 3rd. But Yeah, at least then it would make sense for inner release to appear where it is. But where it is right now, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Storm's Eye, like I said, is far too powerful. Wild Expertise, ditch the stealth, and then Fell Cleave is broken. Now, how I would suggest it is to be changed. So for inner release, we're going to just change the text entirely. Get rid of the expanded crits. We don't need it. That's a champion fighter thing. Let's leave it to the champion fighters. For inner release, we're going to change the text to, beginning at 3rd level, when you choose this archetype, while in Defiance, when you hit an enemy with a melee weapon attack, you can choose to use a Fell mark instead of the regular effect. When an enemy hits you with an attack, you take an additional 1d4 damage. I should put while marked with a Fell mark. While marked with a Fell mark, when an enemy hits you with an attack, you take an additional 1d4 damage of the same type as the attack caused. On your next melee weapon attack, you deal an additional weapon die of damage. You can only add 1 additional die of weapon damage per marked enemy that has hit you with an attack. At 14th level, you take 2d4 additional damage, but can add up to 2 additional dice of weapon damage per marked enemy that has hit you with an attack. Whether you hit an enemy with an attack or not, all additional dice of weapon damage go away at the end of your next turn. So, the idea behind the new inner release is, and I think maybe change the name to something with the word Fell in it. But the idea behind it is, again, we want to interact with Defiance now because that's the defining feature. And every single subclass, I want their 3rd level ability to give you a different type of mark you can make so that you have a different choice. For this one, you take additional damage in order to deal additional damage. So it still fits with the idea that you are trying to protect your party by taking hits for them. However, it's building a little bit more around the idea of the best defense is a good offense. If you can burn down enemies faster, there are less enemies to attack your players. So that's kind of how I view this. The wording is chosen specifically because adding an additional weapon die of damage can get broken very, very quickly. So it only applies on your next weapon attack, so that it's not going over and over and over again and becoming very, very broken. And it requires you to get hits. It does mean that as you gain levels and start dealing with harder and harder monsters, this becomes an even bigger choice you need to make, because when a monster only has a single attack against you, trading an additional d4 of damage to do an additional possible d12 of the damage is not really that big a deal. Unless you're really low in hit points and can't get a heal in any way. But as you go up further and enemies start getting multi-attacks with 2 or 3 or 4 attacks, this starts to become, okay, do I have the hit points for this? Do I want to risk it? Do I have the defense for this? Is my AC high enough where all you need to get the additional damage on your next attack is for them to hit you once? If they hit you once or they hit you 400 times, you still only get 1 additional die of weapon damage until the 14th level. So theoretically, if somebody, if your marked target attacks you, but they don't actually hit you with anyone, your Fell mark isn't going to give you any additional damage. It also benefits you to possibly hit multiple targets, which again could cause you to take significantly more damage, but deal significantly more into the damage. So there's a huge choice in here in looking at your hit points, looking at your ability to heal yourself, looking at the rest of the party's ability to heal you, really making that choice of, is it going to be better for me to use my regular mark or my Fell mark? Because my regular mark is still going to protect my party, but I'm not going to take additional damage. I'm not going to do additional damage, but I'm not going to take additional damage. And Felmark has no benefit if the target attacks another creature. They don't get it. Only you get it for Felmark. So if you're going to try the effect of mark an enemy and then get far enough away that it can't attack you, then Felmark is not going to be useful in that situation at all. So I think it adds to an interesting idea of how do I want to do this. And again, if you do have like a Dragoon in your party where they can expand your critical range, this can become a very, very potent ability, especially when you start getting to higher levels where you can mark multiple targets and do multiple weapon damage die. Like if you have, by 14th level, if you have two different targets, both hit you twice that are both fel marked, that means your next weapon attack is doing, if you're using a Great Axe, is doing 5d12 damage. That's a lot of damage. Now, it also does mean if you miss that attack, you can also get rid of your Fel Cleave ability as well. So again, all these different, or not Fel Cleave, your Fel Mark additional to the damage, all these different things that add some limitations to what could be an extremely overpowered ability. And if you work with your party to do things like, casting Fairy Fire on having one of your party members cast Fairy Fire, so you have a much better chance not only of hitting but also of critting to be able to get the full benefit that you can get from this. This turns into a very group oriented ability as opposed to just something that works for the warrior. So moving on to 6th level for Storm's Eye. Storm's Eye felt weird, to be blunt, especially if it was going to mix with Inner Release, where Inner Release kind of took the idea of doing bonus damage, and because of just how powerful Storm's Eye was, I wanted to modify it a little bit so that it was not going to be nearly as broken as it was. So this is what I did to Storm's Eye. Beginning at 6th level, we're going to change the text to beginning at 6th level while you are in Defiance. When you hit a creature that has one of your marks on it, you can choose to bring the Storm's Eye up upon it. The creature must make a Constitution saving throw. DC is 8 plus proficiency plus strength, your strength mod. On a failure, the creature takes 1d6 additional damage from any attacks rolled against it until the end of your next turn, and your Defiance ends. On a success, it doesn't take additional damage and your Defiance doesn't end. At 14th level, the additional damage increases to 1d10. You can use Storm's Eye twice, regaining all uses at the end of a long rest. So we changed a few things. First, Storm's Eye is limited in the fact that not only does it end your Defiance, but you can also only use it twice. Playtesting that will be important because I might say just get rid of, you can use Storm's Eye twice and you get rid of the limit there because it already takes away your Defiance. But yeah, I think for this one specifically we're gonna just ditch that, so we can get rid of that. Now it just ends your Defiance, which again I prefer ending the Defiance to you can use this once per Defiance because it adds an additional thing that you can track. Or that you have to track, and I'm not a huge fan of that. So it still requires the Constitution save. The nice thing about this is if the creature makes it save, you don't burn both your Defiance and your Storm's Eye ability. In this particular instance, as it saves, you can basically just try it again until... Basically, you have to keep trying this until they fail. So you're guaranteed to be able to use it. It just may take a few times for you to actually get it. And then I changed it from weapon attacks to from any attacks rolled against it, which does mean it requires an attack roll, but it means that your magic using allies can still get the benefit from this. And again, when you team up with the rest of your group, this turns into an extremely powerful ability, which is why I limit it to the end of your next turn, which means the warrior will get the benefit of basically 2 turns, because they do it at the start of their turn. They can activate Storm's Eye, and then going forward, all their additional attacks are going to be able to get Storm's Eye, while the rest of the party only gets 1 full turn to be able to take advantage of this. So that fixes a little bit of the problem of Storm's Eye, where it was just far too powerful, and it would basically dictate how your party had to act most of the time, to be perfectly honest. This allows spellcasters to take advantage of it. It does kind of change their thought process, because they're going to want to use abilities that require attack rolls. Specifically, if they can get abilities that require multiple attack rolls, things like Scorching Ray, or Eldritch Blast, anything that gives you multiple attacks is going to get the most benefit from Storm's Eye. And in a clutch situation, it can be really good. And now, thinking about how powerful it is, I am going to kind of put back that idea of you can only use it twice, because again, it's still really, really powerful. I'm second guessing myself after I've already thought of all this stuff. That's where my brain is right now, guys. Yeah. So, with this is Storm's Eye, again, it's a 2 and done ability, not a 1 and done. And again, I do that on purpose. 1 and done abilities never get used. 2 and done abilities get used significantly more often. Not just the fact that you can use them twice, but the fact that people will save 1 and done abilities until the exact right moment. And that means a lot of days go by without them ever using it. 2 and done, they use it more often. So, yeah, so that's Storm's Eye. Going up to Wild Expertise, don't change anything except removing Stealth. Stealth is the only thing I don't think it fits with the class. I don't think it fits with the playstyle. I don't think it fits with the mechanics. It doesn't make sense. The rest of it does, so just remove Stealth. The rest of it's fine. It makes sense for the class. And I don't see any reason to change it. And then Fell Cleave. We're going to change the text to, at 14th level, when you use the attack action while in Defiance, you can activate Fell Cleave to make the additional damage gained from your Fell mark apply to all attacks you make until the end of your next turn. The additional damage is based on how much additional damage you would do on the first attack done after Fell Cleave is activated. Your Defiance ends at the end of your next turn when this ability ends. You can use this ability twice, regaining all uses at the end of a long rest. So, Fell Cleave effectively just makes it so your Fell mark is that much more powerful. And it's especially useful if you are dual wielding. This particular subclass really benefits from dual wielding, simply because for Fell mark, you can only add 1 additional die of weapon damage per marked enemy that has hit you with an attack. So if you are dual wielding, you can technically attack 3 different enemies instead of 2. So using dual wielding gives you additional benefit. You take additional damage, but it gives you additional benefit for your Fell mark, and then also for Fell Cleave, because it means that every single attack you do will have that additional damage. That means that dual wielding does really, really well with the Beast of Deliverance, which I like. I like the idea that the Beast of Deliverance not only gives you a different way to play the class, but actually gives you a different weapon style to get out of the class. Because for the Beast of Defiance, you kind of still can just be the, great axe wielding warrior. This one, you can definitely still do that. A D12 compared to an additional 2D12 compared to an additional 2D8 is a big difference. But when you're adding an additional attack, those differences kind of mellow out, and there are so many different things that you can do with this. So yeah, overall, I think Fell Cleave fixes the big problem, which was it was so much additional damage, and it was almost a guaranteed critical hit when you combined it with reckless attack or anything that gives you advantage. Um, uh, yeah. I think this fixes a lot of the issues with Cleave. Oh, and also you can use this ability twice. You regain all uses at the end of a long rest. So this is another 2 and done ability. So again, it's not massively overpowered. It is limited in the idea that not only does it end your defiance, but it also will it also has a limited number of uses. It does mean since both Storm's Eye and Cleave end your defiance, theoretically, at first glance, they shouldn't work together. However, if you were to Cleave, your defiance doesn't end for Cleave until the end of your next turn. Whereas Storm's Eye ends your defiance immediately after it takes effect. So theoretically, if you were to combine Cleave by activating Cleave right when you take your attack action, no action required to activate Cleave, it's part of your attack action, and then use Storm's Eye, you could combine both of effects to only effectively take the use of one defiance, which again does also add a little bit of choice to it, because yeah, if you want to do as much physical damage as possible, put in Storm's Eye and Cleave on the same thing, but it also means you're using one use of two and done abilities and your defiance, meaning for the rest of the day you can only do that combo one more time, and it's going to end relatively quickly. So yeah, it's one of those things. Do you want burst damage? Do you want sustained damage? Do you want to be able to do more damage later on in the day, or do you want all your damage to go here? Like, it's going to give you quite a few different choices that you have to make, and there isn't going to always be a right choice, especially if you're dealing with large amount. Cleave and Storm's Eye are both abilities that are best used against a creature that has a lot of hit points, because if you kill it before the effect ends, you're not going to get as much of a benefit. The nice thing about Cleave and Mark in general is you don't actually have to hit the target that hits you. And, with Cleave, you don't have to use all the attacks against the same target, whereas Storm's Eye, the target is the one that's affected, so once it dies, Storm's Eye is over, whether or not you got the full benefit or not. So yeah, lots of choices, lots of interesting ways to play. Never really the right or wrong choice. The big issue I think I see with it is it just needs some playtesting to maybe modify some things. Maybe turning Cleave into a 1 and done ability instead of a 2 and done, because of how powerful it could be. All of that is stuff that really needs to be playtested as opposed to just kind of theory crafted, because I can't give you a good answer until somebody physically plays this subclass. So anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, turn notifications on. In the comments down below, let me know, what do you think of the changes? Do you prefer the old version of the Beast of Deliverance? Do you like the new version? All those things in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.